Well, hello and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us for our third Global Alumni webinar series. My name is Kate May and I'm the Director of Alumni Relations here at the University of Sydney. We are very lucky to have about 400 people registered today from roughly 30 countries. So it's wonderful to see how far and wide our community is dispersed around the globe. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Rupal Ismin, the Director of Sydney Knowledge Hub. The Knowledge Hub is a campus for companies here at the University of Sydney. It's a space for innovative organisations of all sizes to collaborate with researchers and students at the university and to help commercialise the groundbreaking research coming out of the university. Thank you so much for offering us your time to moderate the panel discussion today, Rupal. And thank you also to all our panelists, to Rebecca, Anastasia, and Simon. We're so looking forward to hearing the discussion today. Now, if you want to tweet during the session, please use the hashtag USydOnline. And please don't forget to update your details so we can stay connected in the future and enjoy the conversation. Over to you, Rupal.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognize their continuing connection to our land, our water, and our culture. I am currently at the University of Sydney on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional owners on the country on which you, the audience, apparently in 33 countries, are on, wherever you may be. Well, 2020 has been a wild ride so far. We are living through a pivotal moment in history for transformations that have been foreseen, like our climate emergency and the broad uptake of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And of course, for events that have taken us by complete surprise, like COVID-19 and the groundswell that is the Black Lives Matter movement. The US is leading the world in COVID cases, is the epicenter of the Black Lives Matter movement, and has the most divisive president in its history. The future of the US seems to be marked by more uncertainty than ever before. I mean, I personally feel this every day. You know, I just moved back here to Sydney from the Bay Area last year. I mean, I think this is an interesting time for all of us as we collectively grapple with our relationships with each other, with the opportunities that we have been born into, and with the role of government, and of course, with the concept of home and identity. On stage today, we have an aeronautical engineer, a political scientist, and a wildlife forensic scientist and geneticist who will discuss how they have adapted to the disruption in 2020 and what the future holds in the US. We'll have a chance for a Q&A, so please submit your questions in the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen. And as Kate mentioned, if you'd like to tweet, you can use the hashtag USydOnline to share your thoughts. It's my pleasure to warmly welcome Dr. Anastasia Volkova, CEO and founder of FluroSat, a company that empowers autonomous farming, joining us from the USA. Dr. Rebecca Johnson, the Chief Scientist and Associate Director of Science at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, which is part of the Smithsonian Institute, the world's largest museum, education, and research complex, joining us from the US as well. And to Professor Simon Jackman, CEO of the US Studies Center here in Sydney.
Hi, great to be with you.
So we'll kick off with you, Anastasia. You recently relocated from Australia to the United States after raising your last round of investment. Can you tell us and maybe give us an overview of what the last 6 months have looked like for you, both professionally and personally, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rupal, and thank you, Kate, for having us on today. And thank you for all these people who have just joined us. It's a privilege to be talking to you, and we hope that we'll share some useful experience. Last 6 months, it has indeed been a wild ride. I think for agricultural sector particularly has been a wild one. We have seen disruptions in the supply chain, the way that it affected the sales cycles, the fact that not everyone knows, but COVID has really coincided with some critical timing of operations in the Northern Hemisphere agriculture. So you saw restaurant closures, but at the same time, potato producers saw that their contracts weren't closing and that there is no money flowing into the potato contracting into this year. So let's, only hope that everything will be good with that commodity next year. And we've seen a lot that has been hitting agriculture in the last 6 months, and that's what we've been riding that wave and navigating the new norm and trying to establish ourselves and a way for our customers to deal with it.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a lot of change to absorb, moving countries, COVID, and also your customers kind of dealing with COVID as well. Rebecca, you just had you just also moved a few months ago during the pandemic, nonetheless, to take up the role at the Smithsonian. And you moved to the center of it all in Washington, D.C., the center of political activism. I understand you can even hear protests from your house occasionally. How does it feel to be in the nation's capital right now as an Aussie?
Hi, Rupal, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's been a very interesting couple of months. I arrived here in the US at the end of February. My first day of work was the 2nd of March at Natural History Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian Institution. And by the 13th of March, we had decided to close the building to the public, and we had 2 days to move all of our staff to telework. And we have about 1,400 people, give or take, in our building. 400 of them are part of natural history, and then many hundreds are part of either facilities or other agencies that do scientific work with our collections. So it was, I felt like I had to flex every leadership muscle that I had and learn many new ones to do that, because thanks to science, we actually had a pretty good idea of how dangerous it was and what was coming. And I was really proud to be part of an institution that acted very quickly and based on science to keep people as safe as possible.
Yeah, that sounds tough. Managing a crisis on day 2 of your job. I mean, I think we all know it takes kind of at least a couple of weeks to settle in. So that must have been tough.
Hard. 300 staff.
And Simon, the U.S. Studies Center's roadmap of research must have been disrupted quite a bit as well. How have you experienced this year in Sydney?
Oh my goodness. Well, we've had some similar operational challenges as everybody at the University of Sydney has, but that's particularly acute for us as a US Studies Centre, where the US is the story at the moment, and Australia's got its own story with COVID, but you throw on everything that's happening in the US, as you just mentioned. The demand for what we do as a US Studies Centre, educating Australians about the United States, has never been greater, but we're in lockdown. We can't go to the United States. We're relying on technology like this and our big network of friends and supporters in the United States. We're doing a ton of webinars ourselves, but it's particularly challenging operationally, sustaining the tempo that we feel we need to be sustaining at this moment for our Australian stakeholders, while so much of the way we do business is just not available to us at the moment. And I'm a dual citizen myself, and there's an emotional, I think, twang as well for myself and many of our staff, my family of dual nationals who are back here in Sydney and whose hearts are literally breaking for what we see coming out of the US every day with respect to the pandemic, and all of it coming in the middle of this momentous election year that we were on track for having in November.
Yeah, that's right. It almost seems like it's too hard to swallow all the news or even like understand which piece to focus on.
Yeah, look, and it creates a real, I think, back onto the leadership theme, as a leader of a family, or as co-leader of a family, and as a leader of the organization out at work, managing that emotional side, keeping morale high, sustaining operational tempo under these incredible constraints that we're operating under. It's, dig deep into that leadership suitcase and reach out for help. I've been seeking, my board, some mentoring around town, just making sure am I doing everything that I can be to lead the organization through this incredible moment for us as a US Study Center in Australia at this point.
Yeah, that's, you know, you brought up tempo. That's an interesting point that I haven't really heard articulated before. Tempo change, and just as a society and as a team kind of coming together on how everyone's different tempos are, their work tempos with other obligations, both family and otherwise, is an interesting one. So we talked a little bit about adaptation. You know, you three had to adapt quite a bit. And let's move on to innovation. So lockdowns and changing directions from government with the best of responses have made it incredibly difficult to plan in this period of uncertainty. I'd like to ask you a few questions about this. Anastasia, first of all, FluroSat, of course, helps farmers manage their crops. And it's incredibly exciting to see an Aussie deep tech startup expand to the US. Can you tell us a little bit about what FluroSat does and how you've adapted?
Absolutely. Thank you. FluroSat helps agronomists and farmers have better data for their daily, weekly decision making. When to spray a bug repellent, so to speak, how to feed the crop with fertilizer, how much water to apply. And we're a global business. We operate currently with customers in 14 countries. Our largest revenue now is coming from the US. So I'm based here, and my head of global business development is also here. In terms of how you think of agriculture, you often think about, people say this all the time, agriculture is a relationships business, and you need to be almost, you know, in person, in front of them, and having either beers in the pub if you're in Australia, or going out for some, I don't know, hunting and golf, and speaking as a vegetarian. And so there's different aspects of relationship building. And when you're building a business, what you want to achieve is efficiency, sustainability. And I'm speaking not of an agricultural environmental context, business context, sustainability. You figured out the approach, you're mastering it, it gets more scalable. And so with COVID, we adapted in a number of ways. We felt that it was important for our customers, who are these crop doctors, agronomists, it was important for them to know how to reach out to their farmers. What is the information that can help them? And we are really the business that provides that support and trusted piece of communication. It's like a third-party verification of where your crop is at, what your harvest could be looking like. And when you can't necessarily go there in person, and when you need to educate your grower that everything's going to be okay, we're looking after that crop, we're seeing what it's doing, even if our boot is not in that ground right now, we still know what's happening. It's a true digital transformation that agriculture has gone through on the side of the precision agriculture and decision support software that I think has been underappreciated as we saw some of the commodity and supply issues on the other side. And so particularly steps of adaptation have been, we've rolled out a virtual agronomy course starting from May, and we finished that, I think starting in March, and we finished that in May. And that had only, you know, some 500 participants from across the globe, and everyone wanted to know how to live in this new norm. And we feel that it was really well positioned, that, you know, the change of mindset was well positioned to push agriculture just a little bit further into the direction of digitization and remote experience of communication. And the benefit of it has been that people understand that you can scale yourself a little bit better if you don't have to be in the field the whole time, and if you learn how to interpret that digital report, that digital signal. Of course, we all yearn for more human connection, but that's the other story.
Yeah, that's interesting, because your customers, you know, this may be an assumption, but farmers might be, and agronomists and so forth might be a little slower to adapt than kind of other segments. So, you know, this might actually be a good thing for FluroSat. Your comments also on innovation are interesting. You know, a couple of the points that you talked on are around innovations in management style and communication and trust, which is, you know, a key topic I think that everyone's been raising when it comes to COVID. Simon, income inequality has been an increasing problem in many wealthy countries, but arguably nowhere as much as the US. COVID-19 has exacerbated this, and much more so for people of color who tend to be renters, who tend to have fewer work from home jobs. Do you think that the US is going to adapt to be more equitable, or do you think we'll only continue to see inequality grow?
Terrific question. There are some structural drivers of income inequality, in particular in the United States, that seem to be beyond the power of any government, no matter its political complexion, to change. But there is also an important political overlay, and that is, what you do with tax rates, what you do with inheritance taxes in particular, that are big drivers of inequality intergenerationally. And I think that's one of the things that, the Biden campaign is talking about. So I expect that if there is a change, and I expect it will become a big theme in the election campaign in particular, talking about, is this time for a fork in the road? That America's perhaps gone a little too far down that road, and many Americans themselves would recognize that. And I think you're right to point out COVID. I think that the thing that it tends right now, the Black Lives Matter conversation intersecting with COVID, is making it a racial inequality story. When I think in the long run interests of the United States and the long run interests of perhaps more people than just people of color in the United States would be to transform that conversation into where you're alluding to, and that is, it's an economic inequality story as much as it is a racial inequality story. But it's a very hard nut to crack in the United States for the structural reasons: weak trade unions, the federal system overlaid on top of that, things that were set in motion almost a century ago now as long-term drivers of inequality in the United States. Tax rates, I think, we'll see how the election and what the Congress looks like post-election, and the appetite of whatever that Congress and whoever the president turns out to be to address this. But that's really about the only way, I think, in the short term, we might see some redress on income inequality in particular.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The intersection of Black lives and COVID has kind of unpeeled that racial inequality, but I think making it an economic inequality conversation is a way to almost get America united around the topic, rather than making kind of a liberal versus conservative or Black versus white or whatever issue. So really good point. Rebecca, the Smithsonian Museum provides a physical experience to visitors. You started a day before you guys locked down. And the museum was already quite digitally forward prior to lockdown. I mean, I mentioned to you earlier that your YouTube channel was an integral part of my 7-year-old's homeschool lockdown experience. It was basically its teacher. What initiatives have you had? What initiatives have been launched to adapt this year, and how successful do you think that they have been?
Yeah, many people have been benefiting from our fabulous communications team and all of their hard work to date. But as you say, museums are very much place-based. They're places that it's very likely everyone tuning in has been to one of the Smithsonian museums, or no doubt has heard of them if they haven't visited many of them. What many people don't realize is that we're 19 museums and a zoo. So we are many different parts of a big institution, and often people come here as their trip. It's the one time in their life they'll come to DC and have the opportunity to visit those museums. So we take it really seriously, the place that we offer, and similarly, our science is very much done in place. So I have 300 staff doing science. They're not the kind of stuff that you would typically see if you came as a visitor. So it's been a huge challenge to pivot to online in such a short period of time. We've talked about in the 5 weeks that after shutdown, we probably were nimble in a way it would have taken us 5 years without a pandemic as a driver. And so we have, we were working on some virtual tours, but by virtue of the fact that we're a place that you, if you're lucky enough to come once in your life, that's an amazing opportunity. Why not try and make that more accessible to anyone, anywhere, if providing they have internet connectivity and a computer? And so we already did have some virtual tours, and I encourage you to go online. Lots of people have been, including myself and my staff, because we missed the building so much. And I actually think that's that makes it even more special place to visit in person. Probably you've all had the experience of reading about something or a really special place, and so you know a lot about it. So when you get the opportunity to do that in person, it's extra special. So I see increased accessibility online as only a good thing for museums. And getting back to your point about the YouTube channel, Rupal, we saw a 600% to 700% increase in our website visitation the week after shutdown. So I think a lot of people were really missing the museum already, and we do have a lot of really wonderful educational content already, but our team pivoted completely online to something that what was broadcast out to schools once a week. Suddenly our entire programs were delivered online, and we've had some amazing, we've had the opportunity to see whether or not dealing with a scientist live has more impact than dealing with recordings. I think you probably know the answer to that, but the fact that we still have recordings for all of our experts delivering educational programs is what a lot of parents have been drawing on during this time. So it's been an amazing pivot for an organisation that doesn't move particularly nimbly. We've done an incredible job. But even my scientists, they've been attending seminars online, obviously, like most scientists, and conferences online. I was listening, one of our scientists was talking the other day. She was chairing a conference in Hawaii, so she had to get up and chair on Hawaii time, which is something that it hadn't actually occurred to me. So it's really, there's a lot of accessibility, but there's a lot of things that perhaps take you by surprise.
Yeah, great. I think your point about your relationships with building is an interesting one, and one that I haven't heard before. You know, we talk about missing being around people, but I haven't heard it articulated about missing being in a building, and I feel that same way. So thanks for sharing that. And I think that your point about equity and accessibility is also a good one. You know, yes, everyone misses being in person, but the amount of access that and accessibility for both people that are disabled and people that can't afford it or whatever for any reasons is a good conversation that COVID has pushed along. So let's move on to the future of food and fauna. So last year and in early 2020, Australia has seen disastrous bushfires with more than 1 billion animals perishing nationally. Images of hurt wildlife circulated around the globe, and it's estimated that 10,000 koalas, 1/3 of the koala population in New South Wales alone, has disappeared. Rebecca, you have been the chief investigator of the Koala Genome Consortium and have significantly advanced scientific knowledge of this iconic Australian species. I'd love to hear what this role involved, and secondly, do you think that the species can and will recover?
Yeah, who knew that we wouldn't be talking about the bushfires every day 6 months ago? It was such a consuming thing, as it should have been, because there was so much damage that we saw to property, to people, to biodiversity. Yeah, being chief investigator of the koala genome was a really fantastic experience. It was, I guess it fits into the innovation aspect of our conversation, where I previously, before I arrived here at Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian, I was the chief scientist at the Australian Museum, where I worked at the Australian Museum for 16 years and as a geneticist, and I found frequently I was having questions asked of, would you analyse the genetics of this koala population for us so we can give advice on whether or not that population is at risk of going extinct because of roads or because of land clearing. And it seemed it was very difficult to answer that question just looking one population at a time. with a tiny section of the genome, with the kind of population markers we would usually look at as geneticists. So it was about 2012, 2013, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to sequence the genome of the koala, because now it's kind of possible. Hadn't really been done in Australia before. We obviously have a very strong history and strong track record of medical genetics, and we've sequenced other Australian animals, but they were all led by overseas groups. And so this was an opportunity to do something that was Australian-led, a huge amount of learning to sequence a genome that's actually a little bit bigger than humans. But the benefits have been really something that I'm so proud of. And of course, it was part of a huge collaboration that ended up involving 7 countries, scores of institutions, and there were really interesting things that came out of it. We were able to characterize, in fact, the group, our collaborators at the University of Sydney with Kathy Belov's group, characterized all of the koala immune genes. And in fact, there was an article in the New York Times just yesterday about how that information is being used to develop a vaccine. And of course, disease is one of the things that affects koalas very substantially, plus land clearing, plus climate change and the impact that might be having on their food source, which is a very, very specific type of tree, as you probably know, plus the bushfires. So it's all of these layers that have really ravaged koalas. And another part, of course, right back to the original origin of that project was understanding koala populations across Australia. And we were able to show where the koala superhighways were. So where were the areas where koalas were traveling between and where was the genetic diversity? Because obviously that we want genetic diversity, that's a good thing. And we want to understand their movement so that we can particularly preserve those corridors. So it was a really a great collaborative effort for science that we have worked a lot with New South Wales government and other governments in Australia to ensure that science actually gets into some decision making.
Great, thank you for sharing that. In 2018, a US Department of Agriculture study estimated that 1 out of Americans are food insecure. This has been exacerbated by the climate crisis and of course intensified by the pandemic. Anastasia, I was hoping you could kind of briefly share how FluroSat aims to improve food security.
It's a really big topic. It's like solving for world peace, but someone has to try. And so there's many companies alongside FluroSat who are trying. I guess the how can be broken down into different stages. One being the precision agriculture is how we've been traditionally talking about it. Very similar to what Rebecca just said. You have an issue, it's out there, you're trying to deal with it, you don't have enough resources, it's not attracting attention. It sounds like climate change, right? and this issue disrupts many industries, many things we rely on, and just the fact that we rely on the balance in the world that we're disrupting. And so food security has already been enough of a big issue, but precision agriculture is really now the way that everyone farms. It's just that now we're actually migrating to decision agriculture in a way that you have enough data to actually make the right decisions. But I would like to answer your questions, Rupal, from the perspective of COVID, because this is going to be palpable for attendees. So as a consumer, we suddenly wanted to support our local communities. We suddenly were potentially cut off of the global supply chains, and those avocados from Mexico weren't coming, or those capsicum from blueberries from Chile weren't coming. Australia is wonderfully self-sustainable, but it's also seasonal. Like, it's just normal that you get certain fruit and vegetable and commodities in certain times of the year. That's how the seasons work. But we are a little bit spoiled that we just assume that we will have access to everything as long as our countries are interconnected and the trade is flowing and the dollar, whatever colors that dollar or whatever other currency you're using, is strong. But if we are thinking of the consumer through the pandemic, what we've all learned, that how important it is to have delivery from a supermarket, how important it is to not have the shock and the hoarding, and how fragile is the system that actually maintains the supply to respond to the demand. the same thing propagates actually into the supply chain deeper. So what are we as a consumer now wanting from the retailers? What are we wanting from food brands? And so FluroSat has gone from a company that was predominantly focusing, and with the disclaimer that product doesn't change, we're predominantly focused on how to improve the efficiency and sustainability of the farm. And that was before just a matter between a farmer and their closest advisors. Now it's something that we're discussing in a public forum. Now it's much more accepted. It's not just sustainability and something that millennials grow up with. We're seeing that unless we're going to invest in biodiversity, unless we're going to invest in sustainability, meaning apply just decision support like the ones provided, like the reports provided from FluroSat. When do you fertigate? How much should you put of certain input on that land? What is a way that you can demonstrate the sustainability of your operation to the brand who can potentially then present it to the consumer and help you be a part of that improved premium supply chain? That is really how agriculture is changing, and we're really trying to pioneer these new products like the sustainability verification, not in a supply chain way, but actually we can look at what was farmed and what happened with the crop, and therefore help support the farmer's claim that they farm in a sustainable way that is regenerative or that is positive for the environment, so that the consumers can be sure that that's the case. Because I am sure that the consumers on this call don't know that the bottleneck is not actually that the farmers are not able to adopt these practices. The bottleneck is that the brands do not have enough kind of horsepower and technology to verify it. So we're really looking at delivering the technology that, using satellite imagery and modeling in agronomic space, helps them understand that what was claimed was followed on the farm was exactly what was followed on the farm. And I think there really is a silver lining in all of this, that we're just going to pull through that supply chain visibility and knowledge about the good things that the producers do and connect the consumer more with them, so there's more equity in financial side of the supply chain.
Yeah, no, that's great. A really interesting point to bring up about kind of consumer trust in the food chain, and that being kind of a bottleneck with the brands. I mean, in a place like America specifically, where marketing and brands are so big and hard to know, what you can trust. That's really important. So thanks for tackling that. I'd like to move on to leadership during this time. We're now faced with the challenge of how to move effectively forward after a really awful first half of 2020. Simon, you once wrote, "Americans are rallying, just not for their president." The guiding principle of the US throughout at least my time seems to have been the market, which of course is reiterated by Trump at the top. However, I was reading about a recent poll conducted by the New York Times, which included responses from many swing counties that supported Trump, clearly demonstrating that the public wants, one, the government to solve the health crisis first and foremost, and two, that the government should tackle the underlying issues that are at the heart of the Black Lives Matter protests. What do you believe effective leadership looks like in the US to drive both racial reconciliation and economic recovery?
Wow. Well, it doesn't, I'm afraid to say, look like the leadership we're getting at the moment, number one. But I think, those respondents to that poll were absolutely right. There's really only one institution that can deal effectively with the COVID pandemic at the moment, and that's the federal government. It is a national crisis at the moment in the United States. And historically, this is the great sort of tragedy of what's happening. The United States has had institutions that have done a great job with global public health, perhaps just not with a great job with public health domestically. And you see, some of the worst of the aspects of the United States on display when the federal government essentially doesn't want or can't do much with a public health crisis in this case, and the matter is left to state and local governments to deal with varying level of resources, various different political sort of appetite for wading into the matter to begin with, and you're seeing the results of that playing out now. So a leader that is willing to, I think, take the hit, frankly, and embrace that old maximum of Harry Truman, the buck stops here, and essentially saying this is a time for the nation to come together. We're going to deal with this as one nation, one people. We're going to put all our shoulders to the wheel, and it doesn't matter what state you're from. It's hard to imagine that happening at the moment. Again, Trump, unlike a lot of leaders around the world, and this is not to sort of exculpate him in any way in particular, but unlike Scott Morrison here in Australia, perhaps unlike Boris Johnson in the UK, it's actually had more deaths per capita than the United States. Trump is unique in that he was facing re-election in November, whereas other political leaders, I think, had more time with the electoral calendar. And I think that sort of, again, talk about double and triple whammies, I think that brought out some of the worst or led to a particularly sort of bad set of outcomes here. The first instinct being a political one, how to dodge blame for this unfolding catastrophe in the United States versus how do we rally and bring a diverse, politically diverse coalition together in a time of acute political polarization exacerbated with the election coming closer. And I could almost swap every word in that sentence, or that paragraph rather, for the Black Lives Matter crisis too. It, again, like so many issues in the United States, what good is it really if one state does something particularly novel or particularly brave politically? I think solutions to these issues often come through the amazing power that the federal government has through legislation, through regulation, through example, and through dangling carrots in front of states to move in a particular policy direction. Criminal justice, at the end of the day, is state and local to a large extent, but the federal government has incredible power with agenda setting, with resourcing, creating lots of incentives for states to move in the right direction. Again, but it requires sort of an act of leadership and sort of, I guess, the political talent and the resources that frankly I don't think have ever really been in Trump's reach. He's a president with a 40% approval rating. Frankly, I think he did take a small step on criminal justice reform and now says to advisors at least that he publicly regrets doing so, that it was a Jared Kushner move that pulled him to the left and he regrets doing that. It upset his base. But it needs these moments where leaders are willing to occasionally get out ahead of perhaps where their base of support is. And I think of a small example in Australia's political history where a Conservative Prime Minister, John Howard, led the country towards, a big step in restricting access to firearms. It takes those moments where you do something a little surprising with respect to your base, knowing that A, they'll forgive you for it down the road, and B, it's actually going to redound to your longer term political credit. Now, the problem with that, there is no longer term for Donald Trump. He's up for re-election in November. So it's just a particularly bad set of circumstances to ask that president for that particularly deep dig with respect to political leadership.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many. Unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes to talk about it, but it's a great tragedy that some elected leaders are kind of thinking about kind of the next election. But it's a really interesting one with this one where it seems like the public is really wanting a leader to take charge of these two things from kind of the right kind of public angle, from the right angle that the government has the most levers to uniquely pull. And our hope is that leaders are equipped with the right information to impact change. Rebecca, as part of providing leaders with the tools and information needed to create policies and reforms, this is a big one as well. What role does science play? And I think just as importantly, how can we get leaders to make, and perhaps the public to believe, data-led decisions?
Yeah, look, I think the current, globally, I think we've learned that throwing more data at a problem does not convince people that science is going to inform them. I think we've learnt that for many things. So it's we think a lot at Natural History about trigger words, like how there are certain things that as soon as you say them, people stop listening to you. And our role is to communicate to everyone. We don't want people to think that they're getting an agenda when they walk into our building. We want people to think they're getting the best quality science, which is what we do. And that's what we always aim to present in our galleries. And so in my experience, I mentioned earlier, we were really fortunate to work in Australia with some of the governments on koala conservation. And it's not about hitting anyone who's a non-scientist with as much data as you possibly can, because as a scientist, you think that's a very persuasive argument. It's all about identifying, and I think Anastasia's she does this on a daily basis, identifying a problem and showing how science is the solution. And all of us that work in science, that's what we do every day. And a lot of that is on us to make sure that we communicate it very clearly. And even though it's very complex and that's how we get there, we need to be able to strip away some of the details that don't take away from what we're trying to communicate, but make it much more clear.
Yeah, that's great. That storytelling around the data is an interesting one. So it's a shame, I feel personally very sad that I can't continue to ask my own questions. We're gonna move to Q&A. So first we have a question by Grace Gao. How will the pandemic change how we collaborate and build meaningful, trusting relationships in business? You know, I know that both Rebecca and Anastasia earlier on our prep both were interested in answering this. So Anastasia, maybe I'll punt it over to you.
Yes, thank you. I alluded to this a little bit, that we are seeing industries that haven't necessarily been the leaders of innovation and digitization really step into the space. And so when you think of building business relationships, I really think that we should keep stepping into this uncomfortable space of connecting with each other in ways that we would normally do, but in a virtual format. And so it might feel strange to only, check in and check out at the end of the conversation and never say anything that's not business related, for example, because it's a meeting, it's a webinar. We're very professional here. It's a professional context. Whilst actually, when you're us included, when we're calling our customers, our partners, our potential partners, everyone's just human, and we're all wanting human connection. And I wonder how we will continue to relate in that new way, that maybe now it will be 5 minutes at the beginning allocated, not for people trying to get into the meeting room because they were in the airport or the car was somewhere, but now everyone can get in on time and spend the first 5 minutes talking about how their day has been, so everyone feels more connected. I feel like we need to reinvent these new ways of connecting to each other. And I think one of the biggest benefits is that, for example, FluroSat now is expanded into Latin America, and I haven't stepped on the continent. Like, it's something that's mind-blowing that people are accepting us being away. Yes, we're hiring there as in other places, but we're currently away, and people are saying, okay, everyone's remote now. Of course, you can see what the crop looks like in Kansas or in Queensland and New South Wales. You might as well do it in Bahia in Brazil. And that's just that business relationship and knowing how to communicate and just be no different to yourself of how you would show up if you were to came off of a plane.
Great. Rebecca, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess this is a great question, because I think the pandemic has shown us more than anything how easy it is to communicate. The fact that we're doing this, we probably wouldn't have done this pre-pandemic, or it would have been a special event or something. So communication is super simple. In fact, we're probably all a bit fatigued by looking at this much of our colleagues all day, every day. But how do you convert that into a collaboration is the real key, I think. And I think about the collaborations that I've been involved with. They involve that something personal, trust, basically. So I think it probably is a bit more challenging to either casually bump into a colleague or organically have a conversation that might lead to a collaboration because all of the elements are there. But it's not impossible. The fact that we're already using this to communicate, I think, we're very lucky. This didn't happen 100 years ago in the last pandemic. So we have that. We didn't have to write letters and have them delivered. One thing I guess I worry for people that don't have access to technology so much right now. I think there's a real equity issue. And I think for us as leaders, we need to think about that very hard and how we can address that. And I also worry for early career people, because that's when I rely very heavily on the networks that I developed as early career and the ones the opportunities that were provided to me. So I think us as leaders and mentors probably need to think actively about how we can promote that and assist early career people. I worry for them and their output. It's been really hard to do science, for example, when the building is closed.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, right now the US is talking quite about whether healthcare is a human right. I wonder if that conversation eventually is going to move to the internet and accessibility being a human right. We have a question from, let's see, which one should I go to? So this is an interesting one. It's from Joseph Curry. Anastasia, you might be able to best answer this one, but how would COVID disrupt the life cycles of products and services today? Do you believe this will prohibit development of innovations? We're talking so much about innovation and how COVID has made us innovate, but at the same time, we have these collaboration barriers or hurdles that we want to overcome.
Yeah, if anything, I think it will accelerate the need, because everyone's forced to demonstrate how they're adapting. And often this means that larger businesses and corporates who were hard to get hold of actually now are available, are not on a business trip, are in the office, are stuck in front of their computer all day, and can talk to startups, deep tech companies like us. We are seeing that positive reception and more, as we talked about today, accessibility of other leaders to collaborate with. And so I believe innovation will not suffer from it. It's an acceleration that's been a bit brutal, if I may say. That's the only thing that we need to rapidly adapt to, how we're going to do this in a new way. But I think that's why everyone's looking to startups, because that has been our norm. We have a runway, we have a deliverable to our shareholders, to our customers, and we need to execute, and we need to invent ways to execute, even the whole world is going into COVID. And I think that's what innovation is, and the businesses that are more traditional, I think, are really forced to adopt innovation, even from just the basic digitization. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I absolutely see that going ahead rather than backwards.
Yeah, no, that's a good point about adaptability and making sure it's harder to do it, but there's a need for it. I mean, I think it's great that we're talking so much about in educating our children about resilience and adaptability. That's like kind of one of the core kind of skills that we're trying to ingrain. So it's good to see. The next question is from Jane Hill. Simon, if you could choose one leadership skill to prioritize post-COVID-19, what would it be?
Wow. I'll stop thinking about that as from the perspective of the President of the United States and more the leader of an enterprise. But I think, look, what Rebecca was talking about earlier, where how we build trust through these networks, and look, scientists have been collaborating through technology forever. Co-authorship teams that span the globe and follow the sun, almost production models with articles and various projects I've worked on. That works fine for people and you've done work with in the past, or you meet at a convention face to face, you catch up once a year or twice a year or something like that. But growing networks, number one, and number two, think about that inside the organization too. We're onboarding staff. We onboarded a senior leader in our organization. And I've just got to stay mindful of those sorts of people in my team. And so I come back to empathy, trying to put myself in the shoes of new employees or people that given everything I said earlier about the United States Study Center, the operational demands on us and tempo, but what it must be like for new employees, new leaders in the organization, finding themselves in this situation. If I'm finding it tough, given how much support I have as the CEO of the organization, what must it be like for some of my direct reports and people that are trying to get new initiatives up? And so it's just, how do I keep that checking in, bringing people along? How can I support them? And I'm finding that it's so easy to do that face-to-face with all the body language and all the cues you get when you're in the building together, coffee, water cooler moments and all of that. How to keep that side of leadership going in sort of a small to medium enterprise like the one I lead. I'm finding that perhaps the single biggest question I wake up in the morning and through the workday, the question I'm coming back to all the time.
Yeah, no, those are two really good ones. I mean, I haven't thought about that, but developing new relationships is very hard, particularly if you're not the most adept at kind of selling yourself and selling your ideas, right? That's like a skill that we know that we all need, but communicating that digitally is an additional challenge. And the culture one, of course, is how do you not just transfer culture of your team to new onboards like you mentioned, but also how do you kind of keep culture alive when, as I mentioned, people might have different tempos of how they want to work, different requirements that you may or may not be aware of. It's tough. So that, I could feel like I could talk all day, but we're coming to the end. So to end this on a positive note, I'd really like to hear the silver linings from all of you of 2020 so far. Simon, perhaps it would be great if you can start. Okay,
sure. Look, one thing we keep coming back to at the US Study Center is, look, as much as it's been distressing, I spoke earlier of some of the emotional pain we feel looking at the United States, the great uplifting moments are to see how widespread support for the Black Lives Matter movement is. That this goes deep into American society at the moment. Clear majorities of the US population, are saying enough is enough, and something has to change here. And the point I come back to, and something we talk to our Australian audiences and stakeholders an awful lot about, is that it's not the first time that American civil society has risen up and exercising that great First Amendment right and that great tradition in the American political tradition of getting on the street and making some noise. And that has inspired the world, certainly over my lifetime, going right back, as a toddler, the Vietnam protests, the peace moratoriums, the women's movement, at least the modern version of it, Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and you could even point to conservative thought around the world. Often finds its intellectual sort of anchor points are in that deep tradition of civil society and discussion and intellectual contest that in American higher ed, and it's that side of American society that continues to inspire. And indeed, we saw that in Australia. Thousands of Australians took to the streets, inspired by, to revisit the cause of racial justice in Australia, inspired by the way that their American cousins, as it were, had taken to the streets. And again, not for the first time have we seen ordinary, everyday Americans inspiring the world through their example to get out there and give voice to a political issue.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I think that, in this kind of news heavy world and, everyone trying to get attention, to see the cut through, if we're talking from a communications point of view, the cut through and kind of the how consistently Black Lives Matter has been, taken over everyone's kind of hearts and minds has been really uplifting. Rebecca, how about you?
Look, yeah, I think the opportunity has come in the disruption. That we have, everything that we have done largely has been disrupted, and it's been really hard. it has not been easy for anyone, actually, and particularly not here in the US. We've had a lot of loss, and we've been thinking really hard about these big issues. One thing that comes up again and again, and we even discussed it earlier on the call, is the no commute. People love the fact that their commute is super short. Rupal, you mentioned earlier that I live in downtown DC. I intentionally lived here so I could walk to work, because I knew that a short commute was great. And so the rest of the world has come on board with that. And who knew that my commute could be shorter than 7 minutes, or what it normally is to walk. So I think I've heard really special stories of people being able to have more meals a day with their family because they're not commuting 2 hours a day. We all, I suspect, and including all the people tuning in, probably spent a quantifiable amount of our time on a plane before this year. And the disruption that none of us wanted and none of us particularly happy about has given us the opportunity to rethink that. Do we need to go back into the same old patterns, or are there ways of doing things different, which might be better for us, and they might be also better for the planet in some ways if we're not polluting so much?
Yeah, your points are good. One, it's keeping us, keeping leaders on their toes, or keeping all of us on our toes. And then second, thanks for bringing up that kind of personal aspect of it. I think everyone has had to adapt quite a bit. There's a lot of, I personally have gotten to see my children more and be home for more dinners and so forth. So that's great. Anastasia?
Definitely, dinners and no plane time are my absolute favorite, but as a leader, I'm even more fixated on how can we transform one of the fundamental industries that everyone depends on, agriculture, and how does generally the innovation penetrate such large industries. And I think the silver lining for me has been that suddenly it seems like everyone's at least is alerted to the issue that we need to innovate, and this is the table stakes. And with those table stakes come these consumer sentiments around sustainability. And so what this collectively means to me, with less air travel and more conscious consumption and understanding of where our votes go, is a conscious and more resilient new version of us that I hope will emerge towards the latter part of this year. And we'll see just that transformation of the society, that we will be a little bit more conscious about our choices and focus on things that, if we need collaboration, let's work out how to do collaboration and not spend, as Rebecca said, 4 days every 2 weeks on the plane. Why otherwise wouldn't we do it for environment and ourselves and our mental health as well? So yeah, I see there's a lot of life improvement we can have if we keep this new norm and we transform it into something that is a functional new norm.
No, that's a great one. I think that, conscious consumption, I love that, shopping, particularly in America, takes up a central point in Americans' lives. So, replacing that with something else that should take central to lives is great. So sorry we didn't get to all the questions from our audience. If for any relevant ones, we'll have our speakers reply by email if they can. Thank you so much, Anastasia, Rebecca, and Simon, for your wonderful contributions today. 2020 will undoubtedly go down in history as the year that challenged the world. We're already reflecting on how we live and work and what changes we might take and make to become a more agile and adaptable. And hopefully this will lead us to reassess our priorities as individuals and as society, as Anastasia just closed out the panel with. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar. This is the final event of the Global Alumni Webinar Series. If you would like to see more events like this, please do let us know. And just a quick one, after the session, a survey will pop up, and we would be incredibly grateful if you could spend 2 minutes filling that out. On behalf of the University of Sydney Alumni Relations Team, thank you for staying connected to the University of Sydney.